Well, hello, welcome back to Under the Bonnet, and Fiona and I joined by Graham Frith this morning, who preached on Sunday. Really great to have you with us. Thank you. Thank you so much for preaching on this. Thank you for coming back for a kind of a second look at it. We're really, really thankful. I think we should get out of the way straight. You have a confession you want to make. It's been burning on you.
It has.
Tell us about that.
Well,
Let's get it out of the way.
I woke up Sunday night and realised I had said the original language of the passage was Hebrew when it was in fact Greek, so apologies to anybody that found that offensive.
They all noticed.
I didn't notice.
They've been fretting about it. So.
Yeah, no, it bugged me, so I was frustrated by that. But anyway, I've said it now, I can breathe easy.
I think that was the only mistake you made, so that's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Look, why don't we read it, Fiona? We're going to read up to verse 22, and let's just follow this along first of all. So Hebrews 11, and we're going to read 1 to 22.
Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith Abel still speaks even though he is dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children, because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they're looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they'd left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones.
Thanks, and obviously we'll tackle the rest of that next week. You called this the title Big Picture Living.
I did.
We'll use that just to dig in a little bit shortly. Fiona, question for you, because you're our kind of resident Hebrews expert. Congratulations. Why is this here? Because obviously it feels like we're entering a completely new stage of Hebrews. Why have we suddenly gone to looking at faith? What's going on?
Well, I don't know, but I think it might be that last week we had really significant passage, the therefore, which was that was chapter 10, verse 19, summing up everything that we've already had in Hebrews. Therefore, because of the wonderful privileges we have, and Andy was teaching us, let us draw near to God, let us hold on swervingly to the hope we profess, and let us spur each other on to love and good deeds. And I think that because the writer of Hebrews is a pastor, basically, he loves the people he's writing to, he has a pastoral heart, he's then giving them practical examples of what this looks like. He is himself helping them to hold on to their hope, and he is himself spurring them on to love and good deeds by telling them about guys who've gone before, who have lived the lives that he wants them to live. I think it's something like that. So it's like he's telling them what he wants them to do, and then he's giving them these wonderful biographies of these heroes from the past. And he's also showing them that they're being tempted to drift back to Old Testament Judaism, and he's saying to them, no, the gospel is actually the fulfillment of that. These Old Testament guys, who they would have known very well, were gospel men. They were holding on to the promises of God. And so it's not, Christianity isn't some new weird kind of cult that has just come out of nowhere. It's the fulfillment of what Abraham and all of the rest of these guys were living and believing, I think. Okay, so that kicks us into this kind of last section that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. Graham, you kicked this off, and I loved it with it was Martin Lloyd-Jones-esque. This is what
It wasn't intentional.
Okay, this is what faith is not. So you actually told us what it's not, and this is what it is. And I thought that was quite useful.
And it may not have been an exhaustive list.
No.
It wasn't, but it was things that struck me as I was thinking about how faith is thought about, understood these days, and the confusion that might come as we begin to jump into this passage in the early description of what faith looks like. So I wanted to just kind of communicate with folks what I was processing as I was going through it, and hoping that they would be processing in a similar way.
And one of the things, of course, faith is not, is just another way of talking about religion, which you mentioned, because we use that a lot here, people of faith, of all faiths and none. And what we're talking about here is people who have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And arguably, of course, everybody has faith. You have to, you live by whatever you believe about this world.
But I wanted as well with that, what faith is not, to get beyond just a belief system, just a way of looking at life that fits with my cultural background, my family background, or something that I've just grown up with, to the way which I firmly believe is the only way, is the unique way of living, which is with faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And I mentioned in the message just how uniquely blessed we are to have the sort of promises that we have here about what is coming, about the guarantee of heaven and all that's waiting for us, which no other belief system gives a guarantee in that sense. So we're in a very unique situation in that way.
One of the things I loved was the fact that, because you read down that list, and by the end you're kind of going, oh no, that's so great, the heroes of faith and
that's
so
right.
on. They pretty much all messed up, didn't they?
They did.
I suppose you could argue Abel didn't, Enoch didn't, but pretty much all the rest of them.
Noah did. I really love that, because I think, if you actually read Genesis' account of Abraham, he's all over the place. He's not trusting God. He's sending Sarah off to. He's doing all sorts of bad things and not trusting God. And yet, when God looks back at his life, he's commended for his faith. I find that really encouraging, because my faith is all over the place, and up and down, and and yet, I think God is pleased with when he looks at the sort of the whole of our lives, rather than when we have really rubbish times.
And he's not necessarily commending them for their achievements, which was another point I brought up. Faith doesn't necessarily equate achievements. And oftentimes, and especially as we read this passage, we think about the heroes of the faith, and everything that they achieved is way and far beyond anything I could ever achieve. And so therefore I, as a person of faith, my faith is far less, it's far lower, it's more insignificant than these guys, where their faith was just amazing because of what they achieved. But actually, I think not just looking at the passages you've mentioned, they were far from perfect, but even our own experience of life. I mean, servants of God, missionaries around the world, oftentimes their achievements in this life were minimal. And like these guys that I mentioned here, they only saw things from afar.
Yes.
But sometimes we fall into the trap of equating great faith with great achievement.
Yes. And that's where you're, living with the big picture living. I think it's only in heaven, isn't it, that we will see these things clearly. Because the next bit, nicking the bit that Peter's going to be talking about, it talks about the other people of men of faith who was halfway through verse 11, who basically
Moses.
and is it verse 32? No, the guys who were sawn in two and burned up, and they just had a terrible time, and they were still the world was not worthy of them. Wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves, holes in the ground, and yet they're still heroes of the faith. And they didn't achieve anything, like you said. But so I think God sees it differently to us.
Absolutely.
Which is encouraging.
So that's what faith is, and then what faith is.
Before we get on to that, just to keep on what the faith isn't, I tried to emphasise, I think, on Sunday as well, the difference between what faith is and positive thinking. Because this verse 1 could easily be confused with positive thinking. If I have enough faith, if I can muster up within me enough self-belief, enough confidence, then I will achieve the things that I'm hoping to achieve. I will get to what I want. I will do those things that at the minute I'm not able to. But it depends on me mustering up that faith. And I think it was necessary to get a little bit deeper into the translation of this. The Amplified Version was helpful.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
That this is not about me having to muster up this faith to become like the heroes of faith. It's much more about faith becoming a natural consequence of having a right perspective. And then it's not about me, it's about God and what he's going to do with me, but I need to see him clearly for who he is and see myself in that broader picture in a correct way. And I think then the faith naturally flows from that, and I think that's what comes out later in the passage.
And you said that very helpfully, that the reason that we have faith is because we have a divine guarantee. It's not about what I feel, it's about what the faith is in. And if the faith is in his rock solid promises, then that's what matters. So it's what I'm holding on to. It's not how strong I'm holding on to it. Is the important thing.
And I think part of that comes as well from our context where we live and work in Bolivia. The Christian church, the faith is still very immature, and I think a lot of people come into the church with an expectation that by being a Christian, everything is going to work out for me. By being a Christian, my illnesses will be healed. By being a Christian, my business is going to be successful. So I come into the church to learn faith so that all these other things then slot into place.
So my life will be better.
Exactly. And so that kind of immature view of what Christian life looks like and will be like, I think if you don't understand what this is really saying, you can misinterpret it and apply it in that sort of a way.
It must be really hard for them then, I guess, when rubbish things happen. That must be really tough.
Well, one of the most successful churches, we call it a church, it's not really a church, it's called Pare de Sufrir, which is a Brazilian originated church which has spread right across South America and is now moving into Africa. It's a very Pentecostal type of church, but Pare de Sufrir means stop suffering. And so the whole title of the church to get people in is that this is the way you can stop suffering, which of course everybody wants. Why wouldn't you? The problem is, hundreds of people are coming through the front door with that expectation, but at the same time, hundreds of people through the back door because it didn't quite work.
And they obviously, like you say, they haven't read the New Testament to see that actually we're never promised that.
Exactly.
So
I wanted to make that emphasis because I think although we don't necessarily have that same context here, in many ways we do, with the positive thinking kind of thing, that whatever I put my mind to, I can achieve. If I just try hard enough, anything is possible. But it's not necessarily the case, and certainly the Bible doesn't preach that, and our experience of life is, I could try and win Wimbledon, and I could put my mind to it as much as I want. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they say it on the telly, don't they? And you think, no, that's wrong.
They did. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean I can.
No, absolutely, no.
I want to come back to your context shortly and just ask you as a kind of warning, a question about what can your context, what can the Latin American church teach us about faith in this country? So maybe be thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
But you did talk about what faith is, and obviously we have this glorious definition in verse 1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And that fits in with that big picture living, that we are living for a kingdom other than this world, okay, that cannot perish, spoil or fade, kept in heaven for us. So that's what we look forward to. Verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. That fits in with that sense of it's not just everything I can see and touch. You know, faith tells me there is something else. But I think what interests me is verse 6. I was looking at this with a friend recently. Verse 6 is quite a difficult verse, isn't it? I don't think I've got any answers, and you may not either, but I thought I'd just knock this past you. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Now, wrongly misunderstood, that plays very well into the hands of the church that you were talking about in Bolivia. But rightly understood, what does that mean?
Well, if I could be so bold, I think it means what it says.
Thank you.
I think on the one hand, unless
I put back in my box.
unless we do have faith to believe for what God wants to do in us and through us. If I said faith doesn't necessarily equate to risk, but I think faith does involve risk on many occasions, because God, I think, it calls us to do greater things for him. He says, even Jesus said we will do greater things. I think there's that sense as well, that we do want to live in such a way that we're conscious of this bigger picture living, which will then enable us to take risk, to then try and do something. I mean, when we started building the Alfarero project in Santa Cruz, which the building cost us $1.5 million, we knew in theory it would take 12 months, actually took 4 years, but in theory it was going to take 12 months of $55,000 a month. As a minimum, we started off with 1 month's money in the bank. So sometimes if you believe God's calling you to do something, it does involve taking that risk. It does involve talking to the neighbour. It does involve inviting somebody to church. It does involve, my mother's great for handing out Gideon's New Testaments and people that she's never met before. So I think that faith and that believing that God does exist and he is sovereign and we're living within his presence is important. And I actually do believe, even though I wouldn't go along with the theology of Padre de Sofría, the church that I mentioned in South America, that he does reward those who earnestly seek him. His nature is to bless. That doesn't mean he will remove all of our problems and suffering and take away all the nasty stuff, but his nature is to bless his children. And again, there's scriptural backing for that in the New Testament, when he talks about a human father wouldn't give a stone or a snake to their son when they ask for bread, and how much more our Heavenly Father wants to bless us. So I think, without being cheeky, I think it means what it says.
And ultimately the blessing is heaven, isn't it?
Well, so that's what I just want to push back a little on. So it's the word rewards there.
Yeah.
So basically we could look at all of these verses and just go, yeah, reward. Do you see that? That's future. That's the big picture. That's the end. That's all it is. Okay, there's no reward here at all. I don't think any of us are saying that, are we?
No.
So we are saying, of course, that's the reward, if you like. I mean, ultimately, the reward is the Lord himself. It's that I see him face to face. I'm with his people, free of suffering. That glorious, glorious time. But then what? There is reward in this life, isn't there?
Well, there has to be, I think, because here If it was only referring to a heavenly experience, Paul talks about faith, hope, and love. But in heaven, we won't need faith. We won't be talking about things that we hope for, things that we haven't yet seen. We'll have it all there. Yes. So I think this passage here, this verse here, is referring much more to there is that sense of God wanting to bless his children now, that he is pleased with the faith that we express in him now. I don't necessarily think this is just about that ultimate reward that you mentioned.
But I guess the reward is that we have as Christians is in coming to him, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we're coming. He doesn't necessarily give us big cars or whatever, physical things, but the reward is, a lot of the reward is about having a relationship with him. We come to a person, don't we? And that's what you were saying. It's not just a belief system. We come to him. And I love it in the Gospels where we've been looking at Mark, haven't we? And Jesus says that if we even have faith as small as a mustard seed, so he's not calling for us to be, even just a little bit of faith pleases him. So I don't think we should use this as like some people attempt to use this as like a weapon to kind of beat themselves up. I don't have enough faith, I've just got to kind of, try harder. I think we need to know that just as a parent is, delighted with a child's, first little stumbling steps. God, when he sees the tiniest bit of faith in us, he's delighted in that. And as we come to him, he's really pleased with that. Like the man who comes to Jesus, I can't remember where it is in the Gospels, but he says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I think that's our prayer, isn't it, as Christians? I've got a tiny little bit of faith, but it's very wobbly. Lord, help that to grow as I trust in your promises. I trust in who you show me that you are, if that makes sense.
And I think one of the things I wanted to pick up as well on Sunday is, how do we get faith? How does our faith grow?
Yes.
And I think my feeling is that this passage supports this, but my experience as well, it doesn't necessarily grow by me just trying to muster it more and to make it grows because I have a right perspective. So thinking about this particular verse, the rewards may come not because of the focus on the rewards themselves, but because of the focus on the relationship with God,
exactly,
and coming to God, and then if he rewards us as a result of that, or whatever, however he wants to bless us, that's his choice. But our focus isn't the rewards, which is often the mistake in Bolivia. And in terms of faith, our perspective on where do we come from, where are we going, this whole bigger reality of who we are as children of God, and then the more that we know God, the more that we find him, the more that we experience him, then the faith is a consequence, it's not an end in and of itself.
And I think we have to remember he knows that faith is hard. I mean, we are physical beings and he's made us to live in a physical world, and heaven will be physical. So for us to be trusting in something we can't see is really hard, isn't it? It doesn't come naturally. And I think he knows that, he understands that. Just as, with kids, you appreciate it's hard to say to them, I'll there'll be something lovely at the end of the week. They find that really hard, don't they? Because they can't see it.
And it's too far away.
God isn't he's not kind of nasty. He knows that it's a struggle, and he's kind of urging and encouraging us. I think that's the tone here. And
Go on.
No, that's probably a bit random, but I was just thinking this morning, listening to the radio, we live in a world that is physical and it seems so certain and dependable, but it doesn't take much, does it?
No,
a few lorry drivers, not, and we're like, it's just, and a tiny little virus that you can't even see, and yet we live with this kind of sort of, we believe this lie that everything here is absolutely dependable really and certain. And you think it really isn't. We're living on a spider's web, but we just don't believe it, do we?
Thank you. That's a really helpful thing to say.
It's a bit
scary. Graham, let me ask that question then. What do you think the Latin American church can teach us about faith?
I think one of the things it can teach us, and it connects really well with what you were just saying, is in a more developed, wealthy nation, like ours here in the UK, we have the means by which we can surround ourselves with safety nets. So life insurance, house insurance, car insurance, health insurance, whatever sort of insurance we want, and we can protect ourselves with layer upon layer of backup when things go wrong. And we can get to the point of depending on all of those things rather than having faith depending on God for whatever in our lives. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why so often the church in the developed world, Western Europe, UK, can become a bit stagnant, can become a bit limp, I suppose. Not always, but can do. Whereas in a Latin American context, I'm sure as well in African and Asian context, but in poorer nations where you don't have the opportunity of all of those safety nets, then you do have to learn to rely on the Lord, to trust the Lord for even the most basic and small things in everyday life. Something that comes to mind for myself was during lockdown when the pandemic started, and we've mentioned in one or two of the interviews that we've had here in the church, even we were out in the middle of nowhere. We weren't allowed to go out except for one day a week. We weren't allowed to drive anywhere, and yet we had no supermarkets, we had no banks, we had no chemists anywhere near. And all of a sudden you're thinking, what do I do now? You know, there's no Amazon, there's no food deliveries to the door, there's nothing. And all of a sudden we had to just trust the Lord for the most basic of things.
Yeah.
And he would put us into contact with the person. The little guy in the corner shop was the guy that told me that the fruit and veg market was about to open. He took me there on the back of his motorbike. When I had to get into the nearest town to find some medication because I fell off the roof and cracked my rib in the middle of the pandemic, that's a whole nother story. Walked out to the main road, there's a motorbike just going by, and I just flag him down and he takes me right into the town. You know, all of these things that you just don't have here in terms of the safety nets, there you have to trust. And I think what the church in Latin America can teach us is that dependence on God, even for the smallest details, that dependence on God, even to find a petrol station that doesn't have a big queue. And I'm not saying it's an automatic thing. Yesterday we were very blessed to find a garage that only had 2 cars in front of us, and we filled up the tank.
Yes, because we do. I mean, in reality, we all live utterly dependent on God, don't we? Every breath we take, every time our heart beats.
But we forget that so easily.
We forget it because we think, well, I've got a car and I've got petrol and I'm well, and you know, we don't kind of come to God in that kind of dependent way, do we? Because we think, well, I can do this much and I need to ask God to help me with that bit.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, we need Him to get out of bed in the morning, don't we? So, yeah, no, that's helpful. Do you think, I mean, this isn't particularly, I'm just interested, do you think that your faith has grown over the years of being a Christian, or is it too hard to kind of, do you think it's easier to trust God now than it was when you first became a Christian?
I think it 100% is.
It is?
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
And the reason is, I think the more that we live as Christians, the more that we live with God and in the Lord, and the more we see Him responding, the more we see Him providing, the more we see Him helping us through those difficult and painful times. When the next difficult and painful time comes, we look back and we remember. And it's interesting, in the Old Testament, that's what the children of Israel did all of the time. They looked back and they remembered, which then helped them.
Sometimes they forgot.
Yes.
And we do
and
too.
Sometimes I forget. I mean, we were having this discussion a few weeks ago. Just so honestly, when am I going to learn? You know, it's kind of like, He has helped in the past. He will help, and if there's a hint like that.
And that is a biblical principle.
That's faith.
Yeah.
You know, when we in our projects in Bolivia, in the Alfaro project, once again, we can't pay the wages. We don't have enough money to cover our obligations. The local leadership is starting to stress and panic. What do we do? We think, well, you know what? We've been in far worse situations in the past.
Yeah.
This is nothing compared to what the Lord has brought us through before.
Yeah.
So we're going to believe He's going to do it again.
Yeah. So it's a choice,
and
isn't
He does.
it?
It is a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that those experiences, that bank of experiences that build up over time of the Lord providing, the Lord fulfilling on His promises, and keeping that bigger picture perspective, helps us now, helps me now,
That's a
when we hit those difficult
that
times.
is really encouraging, Graham, because I think it is hard sometimes to, it feels like, you know, God's helped you before, but then the next thing comes along and you just think, so that trusting that he has forgiven us, that he loves us, that he's with us, that he's for us, all of those things. I guess we've got so many promises, haven't we? Like Romans 8 is amazing, isn't it? And it's just holding on to this. But that's where I think again, and I think that's why we've got all these guys mentioned, we need other people. We can't do this on our own, can we? We're warmed as we see the faith of others. You telling us that encourages all of us to go, I want to choose to trust God as well. So again, this is a corporate thing, isn't it? It's not me on my own with my Bible and my little faith in God. It's together, isn't it?
And I think that's what the author was doing here, because you know, even just the context prior to this chapter is all about persevering, not shrinking back, and then he gives us all of these examples to remember. And then in verses 13 to 16, which was my central focus on Sunday, was it's very forward looking, it's very remembering where we're going, it's the promises that we've got, it's heaven is waiting, God is preparing a place for us, and whatever happens in this life, however bad it is, this is a fraction of what we have waiting for us, and that can encourage us just to carry on when things are difficult,
to keep on going. And again, why we need older Christians around, you know, sort of senior Christians, because again, they've been doing it longer. And I often, the older people in our church family, their hope for heaven burns brighter. So yes,
we're circling to land. I don't want to just leave these last glorious bits untouched. Just as you look through those heroes of the faith, is there anything you want to pull out from there? Anything particularly strikes you while you're thinking about that? I mean, for me, I love kind of verse 13 onwards. All these people, I mean, he's just been talking about Abraham and Sarah, were still living by faith when they died. They didn't receive the things promised, you know. People who say such things, verse 14, show they're looking for a country of their own. They've been thinking of the country they'd left, they could have gone back, right? Instead, they were looking, and this is what I love, for a better country, a heavenly one. And, you know, I love this country, literally, I love this country. I love Britain. I love Britain, despite all of its foibles and funny old ways. I love this country. But I'm looking forward to a better country, you know, a heavenly one. And this is what these guys were doing. This is what I need to do as well. Not make home here. Big picture living. That's what we're going to do.
That was my central focus. I think that's what comes out, particularly of these 3 or 4 passages in the middle of this chapter, and I think that's what these guys had, which helped them through the difficult times. And even you asked me to focus on one thing. I didn't talk about it on Sunday, but even this verse 17. You know, Abraham had specifically received from God a promise about offspring, and yet then felt he was being asked to sacrifice his one and only son. And that must have been incredibly confusing. And yet, because of his big picture living, he was prepared to go through with what God was calling him to do at that time. And I think for ourselves, so often things don't work as we think they should, and it's very confusing when things go wrong or badly, or we get sick or whatever. But it's even worse when we firmly believe God has told us something, and we're holding on to that promise, but it doesn't seem like it's working out that way. And I think that level of confusion can really destroy somebody's faith.
Yes, it can.
But if you can hold on to that bigger picture, that even though I do not understand what's happening now, I do not understand what God is doing now, what he's saying to me now, or why he's asking this of me, but even though I don't understand that, I will press on. I think that's very powerful, and this bigger picture hopefully helps us to do that.
Thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, I guess a little phrase I have in my head, I can't even remember where I heard it from, but is, this isn't the end of the story. Basically, it feels like it is, but we're in the middle of the story, and that's what's confusing, isn't it? I mean, not particularly relevant to what we've been talking about, but I love the picture of Jacob worshipping as he leans on the top of his staff. He's had a really messy life, hasn't he? Again, just all sorts of trouble and sin and mess, and yet he gets to the end of his life. He's blessing Joseph's sons, looking into the future and the promises being fulfilled of God being fulfilled in the future. And he's just worshipping God. He's kind of got to that. He was the one who fought God. He wrestled with God, didn't he? And yet at the end of his life, he's come to that place where he's just worshipping God. I think that's lovely.
Good. Thank you both very much. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Great to have you here. And do come back next week. We're hopefully going to have, he doesn't know this yet, but Peter Groves, and talk a little bit through the next section of chapter 11. Thank you.